More now on the fight for Michigan, joined from the Trump 2020 campaign by Director of Communications Tim Murtaugh. And Tim, as Steve Harrigan reported there, Joe Biden was in Michigan yesterday, to talk about his tax plan and what have you, but led with the Woodward book. And you heard his comments in Steve's report. What would you say to, hypothetically an undecided Michigan voter who, after hearing what has been reported the last couple of days, might be troubled by how the president did handle the coronavirus early on?
Well, I think Americans have seen that the president has been out front and leading the country in the coronavirus crisis. And in fact, one of the very early moves was to restrict travel from China to protect Americans as much as he possibly could. And if you remember, at that time, Joe Biden said that that move was xenophobic and fear-mongering. And so we know that Joe Biden would not have restricted travel from China. And the United States would be in a far worse position today than it actually is. Now, Biden loves to go around and tell people that he was warning everybody about the coronavirus back in January. Well, if that's the case, then why on February 28th did he tell everyone not to panic? Now's not the time to panic. And why did he continue holding campaign events and rallies like normal until the second week of March? The fact is, the president was on top of this from the very beginning. It's what he told the American people. At the same time, he told people that he wanted the people to remain calm. He has said, look, he could have caused a panic by speaking in other ways, but he didn't. Part of his role as leader, he believed, was to try to keep people calm and keep them informed, is what the federal government was doing. And that's what the president has done.
One follow-up on that, and then I do want to talk about the president and Vice President Biden's economic plan, especially as it relates to Michigan, which is such an important state. On the February 28th comments that you referenced, Vice President Biden did go on to say right after, saying everybody shouldn't panic, that the coronavirus is a serious public health challenge. And then there was this tweet, we'll put it up on the screen, from March 19th, interestingly enough, which we now know is the same day the president spoke to Bob Woodward, where the vice president said, he was responding to a media story, that words matter, and Donald Trump's used his to downplay COVID-19, mislead the people. He's unfit. So that was the same day, Tim, that President Trump was speaking to Bob Woodward. What do you say to that?
Well, sure. The president has said, I just mentioned this. The president has said that he viewed it as part of his role as president is to keep people calm. And we also know that Dr. Fauci just yesterday on Fox News said that in every single conversation, when he was saying things to President Trump and when President Trump was saying things to Dr. Fauci, and then Dr. Fauci would see the president speaking in public, all of those things were the same. There was never any discrepancy about what they briefed the president on privately and then what the president went out and said publicly. So if Joe Biden wants to latch onto this and say that somehow the president is lying, then he's also calling Dr. Fauci a liar. And I think a lot of people are getting all excited about this because it came in a package that had Bob Woodward's name on it. But the fact is, the things that the president has been saying in public to the American people are exactly the same. He wanted people to remain calm, and he kept Americans informed as to what the federal government was doing to protect them from the coronavirus.
All right, Michigan on economics. In the polls, at least, the president's been trailing Joe Biden. It's gotten a little bit closer in the average of the polls. The last media poll we saw from Detroit News, 47-42 Biden. Vice President Biden yesterday spoke about higher taxes, particularly on corporations for foreign income. He did speak a little bit about tax breaks for domestic manufacturing. How does the president counter tonight? Same state.
Well, Joe Biden is proposing raising the American corporate tax to higher than it is in China. So effectively, he's going to make it cheaper to do business in China than he would in the United States, which is a long track record for Joe Biden, appeasing China and arguing for their interests. And I think you'll hear the president talk about that. Joe Biden argued very strongly and supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization. That little maneuver cost the United States 60,000 factories and 3.5 million jobs. Now, today, Joe Biden wants to raise taxes by $4 trillion. And voters know that President Trump built the world's best economy once, and he's already doing it a second time, while Joe Biden has these terrible plans, a terrible track record with China, and he voted for NAFTA. A local reporter in Michigan yesterday asked him about his NAFTA vote, and Joe Biden inexplicably blamed it on President Bush. even though the NAFTA trade deal was signed into law by Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush didn't take office for more than 7 years later after it took effect on January 1st, 1994. Right. So Biden doesn't have a good answer for NAFTA. He can't explain his massive tax increase, and he's just bad for jobs. He's bad for Michigan and, well, everywhere else for that matter.
And we'll watch the president in that state tonight, campaign event at that airport hangar in Michigan. Tim Murtaugh, good to see you again from the Trump campaign.